Now, the Parliamentary and Health Ombudsman has revealed that attitudes... What are you laughing at?
Sorry.
It's horrible to me.
Went very well.
But anyway, the Ombudsman has revealed that attitudes towards death amongst Britons needs to change for an important reason, actually, to improve end-of-life care.
Well, research has shown that Brits are afraid to discuss death as it often conjures up feelings of anxiety and sadness.
We need to get on with it. We're all going to die. Anyway, this all comes as the public has become increasingly interested in true crime podcasts. Now, you say, well, what's the connection there? Well, we don't like to talk about death, but we like to watch it, is basically...
The morbid fascination
Yes.
with it, perhaps. So today we're asking, are Britons too scared to talk about death? Well, to talk about this, we're joined by psychotherapist Lucy Beresford and Mark Parsons, the former Apprentice Star. Very good to see you both this morning. And Lucy, let's start with you. Do you think, as Britons, we are good at talking about death?
We've become less good at it, and that's because over the last 100 years we've become more remote from it. There was a time when you would have had much greater exposure to death in your immediate circle. If you had loads of children, many of them would have died in infancy, and many people died very early, and so you went to many funerals, whereas nowadays you could be in your 40s and not having been to a funeral of someone very close to you. So there's that anxiety around it. It feels we're more detached. But at the same time, there is this great sense that death will happen at some point. We just don't know when. And so we talk about that as death anxiety. We know it's happening. It's somewhere parked in the back of our brain, but we don't really want to access it because it feels too scary. And the podcasts and the true crime things that we might watch, or the novels that seem to be the best sellers, which are usually about crime or detective work, it enables us to have access to death without actually experiencing it ourselves.
Yeah. What's the sort of younger perspective on this, Ryan? In the sense that the young always think they're going to live forever. You know, it's that sort of thing. But I mean, you know, you've got to deal with it even when you're young, haven't you? And deal with wills and all that. So get these things in place.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I approach it from a Gen Z point of view. I'm 23. A lot of my peers speak about death quite candidly. I find older people, perhaps millennials, boomers, there seems to be this sensitivity and this soppiness that I think we have in this nation, where we can't talk about hard-hitting subjects like death. I mean, there was YouGov polling last year that sampled around 30,000 people, and 45% of those that responded said that they haven't even spoken about funerals to family members. 72% of those that were polled haven't even made a will. So I think as a nation, there's many of us that just don't want to talk about death as a subject. Maybe that's because we haven't legalised euthanasia. In countries like Luxembourg and Spain and Portugal, it's legal to go through that route. We haven't got that in the UK at the moment. So I think there's lots of things that are perhaps contributing to this taboo, and the fact that we can't talk about things like death, which I don't seem to understand, because people my age are very honest and frank about it.
Lucy, what do you make of it? Do you think the likes of Dame Esther Rantzen are talking about end-of-life care? Do you think that is helping the British consciousness talking about death?
I think she is doing a brilliant job on that particular topic because I think it's something that we're going to need to talk about the older we get as a population. I think the other problem is that what we've done in the last couple of generations is that we have parked elderly people into care homes. So we don't have that sense of multi-generational households having exposure to the frailties of old age. We actually we want to airbrush it out and put these people somewhere where we almost can't see them. And I think there needs to be a radical shift in terms of how we talk about death, how we talk about end-of-life care, and how we talk about old age in general, because the majority of people nowadays, particularly Gen Z, they could be living to 110. And but at the same time, we're less religious. We don't necessarily have the faith structure in place that might give us succour or comfort as we get older. So how are we going to deal with that almost from a spiritual point of view? How are we going to deal with that in a way that says, I'm fully embracing this, I'm prepared for it, perhaps I go on retreats. The older I get, I want to have an active elderly life, as opposed to just being parked somewhere in a nursing home and ignored for the last 30 years of my life.
Does the situation get worse then with the fact that we seem to be increasingly moving towards a society, not just in the UK, but actually in lots of parts of the West, where youth is beautiful and all-encompassing. It's all about being young, or if you're not young, trying to look young.
It was ever thus, though. That historically, if you look at beauty records over the last 5,000 years, what they're actually focusing on is youth, which equals fertility. What you want, particularly if you as a species live only until you're about 40, you want to know, if you can't really speak very well because you haven't developed language, you want to know immediately, is someone fertile enough to give you children and to perpetuate the species? You've got wrinkles, you've got a stooped back, you don't look old enough to father children or carry children. It's a shorthand way of a species to have evolved to communicate fitness and health. So we've equated that subsequently to mean that beauty somehow is better, or youth is better. But obviously, I am living proof that you can do things slightly differently. You don't necessarily need to worry about wrinkles to still be amazing.
You're quite right.
I'm really interested to hear what you think about ageist attitudes, because this report also found that it says that we need to start talking about death more and talking about ageing more, because it found that there are ageist attitudes even within our own NHS.
Well, yes. I mean, from a young person's point of view, I feel like age is something that I don't know, there seems to be a lack of respect towards the elderly. I'm finding increasingly amongst people my age. And perhaps that's because of what's peddled in the media, and we look at certain people within the media that are slightly older. I think there's a lot of things that might be contributing towards that attitude. You were saying in the NHS there's an ageist issue there. I'm not exactly sure where that might be coming from, but certainly from my generation and their point of view on the whole, I'd say that's something that mentality should be shifted.
Do we need to be looking after the older people in our society better? Should we give them more respect?
Well, I think they do deserve more respect, obviously. I don't think that we're actively disrespecting them. I've always respected the elderly. I think a lot of my friends respect the elderly. I don't notice a massive ageist issue amongst people in Gen Z.
We're out of time. I just want to know, what do you class as elderly as a 23-year-old?
I think above 30.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer. It's a perfect answer. How about?
So nearly me then.
Nearly you, yeah. What would you class as? I don't know how old you are, but what would you class as elderly now?
Yeah, it probably would be over 100, given that I
Really?
seem to know a lot of people who are still very vibrant and alert in their 90s. So let's get over that threshold, over 100.
Yeah,
Really?
I have to say, there's a lady that I go to church with, Rosemary, and she had a 90th not very long ago, and honestly, she's fit as a fiddle, sharp as a tack, always beautifully turned out. You wouldn't think, and you just think, well, if that's 90... Bring it on.
Yeah,
absolutely. Ryan, Mark Parsons, Lucy Beresford, good to see you both this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Very much indeed.